Brent Wilkes, the last couple of cycles, when the census numbers come out, groups like Dr. Andrade's and yours just go to court and fight for adjustment to the numbers. Has that worked?
No, in fact, we've tried to get sampling, for example, to be instituted in the census. We've lost out on that opportunity.
Explain what sampling is.
Sampling would be to correct for the undercount. The census goes into certain communities, does a really in-depth review of who they missed, and then they extrapolate using that data to determine how much they missed across the country, and then they add to adjust the figures to actually represent that undercount. That would be the smart way to do it. Unfortunately, it gets political, and it's been stopped by Congress, and also the Supreme Court's ruled on this now. So unfortunately, we're not able to adjust the census once those numbers are taken. If you don't get counted, you're out, and there's really not anything that the census or Congress can do to make up for that.
Now, the Constitution requires that everybody gets, that the country gets counted every 10 years. Mm-hmm. Does it say who? Visitors, citizens, voters? Does it say who gets counted?
It says all residents of the United States. It doesn't say anything about their status here in this country, but it definitely says that it's a census of the entire population that's here. And there's historical records that folks that weren't citizens were counted in the census from the very beginning of the country. It wasn't necessarily Latinos that we were talking about back then, but there certainly were folks that couldn't be citizens, such as African Americans, and they were counted in the census.
Jack Martin, who's a resident?
That's exactly the point. It does not count everybody. People who are not residents here, people who are here as tourists, who are here in the country on a short-time business trip, for example, are not counted. The idea of apportioning either federal monies or legislative power, political power, on the basis of counting people who are not resident in the country, that wouldn't make sense to anybody. So the issue here that we're really talking about is, should you be counting people who are physically present in the country but are not legal residents, as well as people who are just temporarily here? We think it makes no sense to allocate federal monies which are not available to people who are illegally in the country in most situations on the basis of their presence and being counted in the census. And we think it makes no sense to allocate political power, the representation in the Congress and in the Electoral College that selects the president, on the basis of people who are not legally in the country, are not citizens, are not even permanent residents.
So if you're a Dominican pushing a rack in the garment district in New York, or a Mexican working at a bakery in San Antonio, or picking apples in the counties in Washington State east of the Cascade Mountains, are you a resident?
Well, let's talk about the Irish, which are a significant lobby here in Washington, pushing for comprehensive immigration reform so they can gain legal status. It makes no sense that they, who are not entitled to the disbursement of federal funds for various programs, assistance programs, public assistance programs, who are not eligible to vote, would have representation through the census in the distribution of those funds and in the distribution of that political power.
In 1790, were there a lot of people in the country who, well, it was an open question how long they were going to be here and whether they planned to live the rest of their life here? I guess there were Irish in 1790 as well.
In 1790, we didn't have the concept of illegal immigrants the way that we have today, and that makes the difference.
I'm glad he admitted that.
Reverendo, what are you telling your community about whether filling out the form is a good idea?
Well, let me start saying that besides the chip shot that Fair just mentioned here, the reality is that in this case, it's very easy for me to present and to introduce everywhere in the nation. And my fellows from LULAC and Mr. Andrade just make the case. Comprehensive immigration reform. If we have comprehensive immigration reform, everybody in this country will be benefited by the benefits of the census. And that's what we're saying. We're telling members of our churches, undocumented members of our churches, which by the way, we expect at least that 1 million will be absentees, not to participate in the census unless members of Congress takes care, and they have until March 31st, 2010, of comprehensive immigration reform. Why? Because basically everything that has been said here depends on the legal status of our people. And the reality is that when you look at the facts, political representation doesn't make sense. Prince William County, Virginia, double the size of the Latinos. No Hispanic at the Board of Education, neither at the Board of Supervisors. But by the way, they have a 287G plan established, paid by funding from the federal government, and arresting and deporting people.
But how would withholding your information from the government help improve that situation that you talk about in a county in Virginia?
Well, that's the concern that members of Congress need to understand. If they really want to have these numbers counted, these people counted, our people counted, then they have to work harder and accomplish comprehensive immigration reform. That's our position.
Well, I've been, unfortunately, working in this business for so long that I've been through, this is my 4th census, and every 10 years the word goes out, these departments of the federal government don't trade information with each other. Don't worry, get counted. That assurance is not good enough for you?
No, definitely. Section 508 of the Patriot Act, by the way, overrides Article 13 of confidentiality of the census. And that's why I believe State Representative Ms. Sol, she was very right on target. And number 2, hey, tell that to Representative Honda. His parents and himself were interned in a concentration camp, let's put it that way, in 1940, when information from the Census Bureau was used by the Department of War at that time in order to round up all the Japanese Americans in this country. And also happened in 2004, where information was given to the Homeland Security under the new Patriot Act in order to realize where the Arab Americans were residing in the country in order to establish surveillance.
Juan, this sounds like a legitimate concern. It sounds like something he's thought a lot about.
Yes, it does, and certainly there is a need. We have to have comprehensive immigration reform. But I would like to go back just to the first question that you asked about what the Constitution requires. That I think it says all persons shall be counted. And it doesn't say residents, it says persons. All persons shall be counted, and that's it. It doesn't specify what kind of person, what color a person, how long that person has been here. Were you born today? You can be counted today. Were you, no matter how far back you go or how recently you arrived, you are a person that in the United States. And so the question then becomes, are you a person? Now, we've answered that question before when the question came up years ago about counting African Americans who did not come here illegally, but were brought here illegally against their will, as it were. And we decided that the way to count African Americans was that each one would be equal to 3/5 of a white. And it wasn't 1 for 1. It was 1 white, 3/5 of a person. So you had, and that was the allocation that was provided.
For the purpose of giving out seats in the Congress.
Exactly,
right.
3/5 rule. And that was declared unconstitutional. Question now becomes, are undocumented workers a person? What is the legal definition of a person? If someone wants to question whether undocumented workers should be counted, then the question they need to address is that undocumented worker a person?